All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving headfirst into one of those cases that just grabs you and never lets go. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Yeah. It's one of those cases that just about everyone seems to have an opinion on.
Exactly. And honestly, how can you not? It's every parent's worst nightmare, right? You're on vacation, you think your kids are safe asleep in your holiday apartment, you're having dinner with friends, and then boom, your world implodes.
It's 2007, Praia de Luz in Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
The McCanns, they're on holiday with their three little kids, 3 years old, Madeline and her twin siblings.
So tiny.
Yeah. And while the parents are at dinner just a short walk away, Madeline vanishes.
Just gone. Poof.
And ever since then, theories have been flying. Speculations run rampant. The media, well, they've had a field day.
It's a case where every single detail just seems to lead to more questions than answers. It's a rabbit hole, for sure. And that's exactly why we're here today.
We're going deep.
Deep dive time. One of our listeners sent in this blog post by Michael Halila titled Discrepancies in the Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And let me tell you, this thing really gets into the weeds.
Oh, yeah.
He's picked apart the Netflix documentary, a book by a retired police superintendent, and he doesn't shy away from pointing out some seriously head-scratching inconsistencies and unexplained details.
I like where this is going.
Now, before we go any further, I want to be crystal clear. We are not here to play judge and jury. We're not pointing fingers or making accusations. Our goal today is to explore, to analyze, to see what stands out. Think of us like detectives, just examining the clues, trying to piece together this puzzle.
I'm ready to put my detective hat on.
Perfect. Me too.
Okay.
Okay, so square one, the timeline. It's the foundation of any investigation.
Absolutely. Got to
Got
get the
us?
sequence of events straight.
So let's set the scene. May 3rd, 2007. The McCanns arrive at their holiday apartment in Praia de Luz. Later that evening, they head out for dinner with friends at a tapas restaurant. The kids, they're all tucked in, asleep in the apartment. Seems innocent enough, right?
Right up until it isn't.
Exactly. Now, enter one of the most talked about pieces of this puzzle, the Tanner Man sighting.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
One of the friends, Jane Tanner, she reports seeing a man carrying a child away from the apartments around 9:15 p.m. This guy, he becomes known as Tanner Man, and for years he's considered the prime suspect.
I can see why. Seems pretty incriminating.
Totally. But here's where it gets wild. Years later, Scotland Yard, they come out and say they've identified the man. Turns out he was just another tourist carrying his own child.
Well, hold on. So Tannerman is a bust.
A total bust. And that, my friend, throws a major wrench into the timeline. Because if Tannerman wasn't the abductor, then Madeleine could have disappeared earlier than everyone initially thought.
Okay, so we've got a timeline that's already getting wobbly.
Right. And it only gets more intriguing from here. Let's talk about how the McCanns got into their apartment that night. Initially, both parents, they say they used their keys, went in through the front door. Simple enough.
Makes sense.
But then later on, they clarify. They actually came in through the unlocked patio doors. Which, to be fair, makes sense too because their friends were using those doors throughout the evening.
Okay, so a little inconsistency there.
Yeah.
Do you think it's just stress? Misremembering things under pressure? Or is there something more to it?
It's hard to say. But it does make you wonder, right? These little discrepancies, they start to add up. And speaking of discrepancies, let's move on to one of the most puzzling aspects of this whole case. The window in Madeleine's room.
The window. What about it?
So early reports, they suggest that it was forced open. Makes you think intruder, right? But then you look at the crime scene photos and the window. It's perfectly intact.
Wait, so was it forced open or not?
That's the million-dollar question. And to make things even more confusing, Mrs. McCann's own accounts of finding Madeleine missing, they differ. In her first statement, she says she noticed the open window right away. But later, she describes a more gradual realization, with the curtains blowing open as if there was a sudden gust of wind.
Okay, hold on. So was the window open or closed? If it was open, when did it get closed? And why?
It's enough to make your head spin. And then there's this whole thing about the lighting that just doesn't seem to add up. Mr. McCann, he says he didn't see Jane Tanner on the street outside, even though she passed them right before that whole Tannerman sighting.
But didn't you say the street was well lit?
Exactly. So if the street outside the children's bedroom was also well lit, wouldn't an open window have been pretty obvious in an otherwise dark apartment?
You would think, right?
It's like every time you think you're getting a handle on things, another question pops up. All these seemingly small details, these little inconsistencies, they start to form a pattern, a very strange pattern.
I'm starting to see what you mean. This is getting more and more interesting.
Oh, and we're just getting started. Remember how Mrs. McCann reacted when she realized Madeleine was gone? She didn't hesitate. She immediately exclaimed, "Madeleine's gone. Someone's taken her." There was this certainty in her voice, this conviction.
That's interesting, especially when you think about it. Most people, their first thought would be that the child wandered off.
Exactly. So why was Mrs. McCann so sure? And another thing, why wasn't there a more thorough search of the apartment before they raised the alarm?
Yeah, it does seem odd.
And then there's the detail that might be the most baffling of all. Madeleine's twin siblings, they were sleeping in the same room, right? And they slept through the entire thing, undisturbed.
Yeah, sound sleepers.
You could say that again. It's almost as if they slept through a hurricane, which has led some people to theorize that they might have been sedated.
Sedated? Are you serious?
And get this. Mrs. McCann herself, she initially suggested that the abductor might have sedated them. But when you think about the logistics, it just raises so many questions. How could someone sneak into that apartment, sedate 3 kids without waking them up, and then abduct only Madeleine?
That seems pretty far-fetched.
Right. And here's another thing. The McCanns and several of their friends, they were doctors, including 2 anesthesiologists. You'd think they'd be a little more concerned about their kids seemingly being sedated with
That's
that.
definitely a head-scratcher. So we've got a timeline that keeps shifting, conflicting stories, a mysterious window, a well-lit street, a mother's certainty, and sedated twins.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half keep changing shape.
And that's just part one of the story. But before we move on, I'm curious, listener. What's jumped out at you so far? What's the one thing that's really got you thinking? What piece of this puzzle seems most intriguing to you? It really does feel like one of those classic whodunits, where you keep thinking you're getting close to the answer, but then another twist pops up and throws everything off.
And with this case, you can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? I mean, the media scrutiny surrounding the McCanns has been relentless.
Oh, absolutely. This thing exploded in the media. From day one, it was international news.
Yeah, and you have to wonder how much of the narrative was shaped by the media. Did the constant coverage, the speculation, did it actually hinder the investigation?
It's hard to say for sure. But, I mean, think about it. You've got this missing child, a family in crisis, and the whole world's watching, judging their every move.
The pressure must have been unimaginable.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And the way the media portrayed the McCanns, it shifted so much over time.
It's like in the beginning, there was a lot of sympathy. But then, as the investigation dragged on and those inconsistencies started popping up, public opinion really started to turn.
Yeah, it's a classic example of trial by media, isn't it?
It really is. And it makes you realize, like, we all have to be careful about jumping to conclusions, especially in these high-profile cases where there's so much noise, so much speculation.
It's easy to get caught up in the drama, to form opinions based on incomplete information.
Totally. It's a reminder that we all need to be critical thinkers, right? To question what we see and hear, to consider different perspectives, especially when it comes to a case as complex and sensitive as this one.
Couldn't agree more. Now, getting back to that blog post, the author Halila, he brings up an interesting point about the Netflix documentary.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, he points out that it didn't really include a wide range of expert opinions. Specifically, he mentions the lack of a gender studies perspective on how Kate McCann was portrayed as a mother.
That's an interesting angle.
Right. Like, imagine the pressure she was under, not only as a grieving mother, but also as a woman constantly being scrutinized by the media. Were her reactions appropriate? Was she too emotional? Not emotional enough. It's almost like she couldn't win.
And it makes you wonder, would a father in the same situation have faced that same level of scrutiny?
It's a good question. And it speaks to those deeper societal expectations and biases that women often face, especially when they're in the public eye.
Absolutely. It's so easy to forget that behind all the headlines, the theories, the speculation, there are real people who are going through something truly horrific. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare. And then to have your grief and your every move dissected by the world, it's just heartbreaking.
And I think it's important to remember that, to have empathy for everyone involved. Even as we're analyzing the evidence, trying to understand what happened, we can't lose sight of the human element.
Exactly. Now, to be fair to Halila, he emphasizes that all those discrepancies he highlights, they don't automatically equal guilt. He doesn't jump to conclusions or accuse anyone of wrongdoing.
That's important.
He even acknowledges that people make mistakes, they misremember things, especially in high-stress situations.
Rich, let's be real, it doesn't get much more stressful than this.
Imagine the McCann's mental state. Their daughter disappears, they're thrust into this global spotlight, everyone's questioning them, and they're trying to cope with this unimaginable loss.
It would be enough to make anyone crack under pressure.
Totally. But even with all that said, it still brings us back to that central question, that mystery that's haunted this case for over 16 years. What happened to Madeleine McCann? Did she wander off? Was she abducted?
We've got evidence that seems to support both theories. We've got conflicting accounts, confusing details, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. And honestly, that's what makes this case so compelling, even after all this time.
It's like this case has this hold on us. We're drawn to the mystery, to the unknown.
It taps into something primal, right?
Yeah.
Like this fear that even in a seemingly safe and familiar environment, something terrible can happen, and we might never fully understand why.
And it makes you question everything. Like, we want to believe there's a logical explanation for everything, that there are answers out there, but sometimes the truth remains elusive.
Which can be frustrating and unsettling.
For sure. But maybe that's part of what keeps us coming back to these kinds of cases. We keep searching, keep hoping that someday, somehow, all those missing pieces will fall into place.
And even if they don't, there's something to be said for the process of exploring, of questioning, of grappling with the unknown.
It's like, it's not just about finding the answers, it's about the journey itself. And this journey is far from over. Just this year, there have been new developments, a potential suspect, searches being conducted in Portugal. The quest for answers continues.
It does, and it makes you think, if you were in charge of this investigation, where would you focus your energy? What's the one piece of this puzzle that you'd be most determined to uncover?
Ooh, good question. And it's a question I want to leave with our listeners. What stands out to you the most in this case? What's the one detail that you just can't shake? It's mind-boggling, isn't it? I mean, we spent all this time digging into this case, the timeline, those weird discrepancies, the whole media circus surrounding it, and we still don't have a definitive answer.
It just goes to show you, sometimes even with all the evidence, all the experts, all the attention, some mysteries just refuse to be solved.
Yeah, and this one, it's not just about the puzzle, right? It's about a real family, a real little girl. It makes you think about all the other cases out there, all the families still searching for answers, for closure.
It's a reminder that for all our advancements, for all our technology, there are some things we just can't control, some things we may never fully understand.
And the media's role in all of this, I mean, it's something else, right? The way they can shape public perception, create these narratives is powerful stuff.
It really is. And it highlights the importance of being aware of those influences, right? Being critical of the information we consume, not just taking things at face value.
Totally. Like with this case, public opinion swung back and forth so many times. It's easy to get swept up in the emotion, the speculation, and lose sight of the facts.
Exactly. And it's not just about being skeptical of the media. It's about being willing to question our own assumptions, too. Being open to different perspectives, admitting that we don't always have all the answers.
It's humbling, right? Like realizing that sometimes, even with all our best efforts, the truth might remain out of reach.
It is. But it's also kind of liberating, don't you think? Like, it takes the pressure off having to find that one perfect solution. It lets us embrace the complexity, the ambiguity. Maybe the journey, the search itself, is just as important as the destination.
That's deep. I like that. And speaking of journeys, it sounds like this one isn't over yet. There were those new developments this year, right? A potential suspect, new searches in Portugal.
Yeah, the case is still active. Which makes me wonder, if you were leading the investigation, where would you focus your efforts? What's that one piece of the puzzle that you just can't let go of?
Ooh, good one. I'm going to throw that right back at our listener. What about you? What's the one thing in this case that really sticks with you? The detail that keeps you up at night? The question you wish you had the answer to? It's a case that forces you to think, to question everything you thought you knew. And that's what we've tried to do today, to dive deep, to explore the evidence, the theories, and the human stories at the heart of this mystery. It's a reminder that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. But even without all the pieces of the puzzle, we can still learn, we can still grow, and we can still keep searching for the truth. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.